Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee. We have quorum, so I will call meeting 1 of the Audit Committee to order. Welcome, everybody. This is our first meeting of this term of council. Also take a moment to welcome Tara Anderson, the city's brand new Auditor General, but no stranger to the world of audit. And of course, acknowledge Vice Chair Jamal Myers, who I'm very lucky to have part of this committee and look forward to working together. Today's meeting is being held with members of council and city staff participating by video conference and in person at City Hall and in Committee Room 1. City Hall is open to the public and anyone is welcome to attend the meeting at City Hall today. The public may continue to participate electronically by video conference. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. As for everyone's patience if we experience any delays or technical problems during the meeting, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials via the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff will be available to members of the committee if you need help with your devices. Members, this is a paperless meeting and I want to remind you that you must submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at auditctte@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. I do not see any. Let's proceed with the agenda review. We have 12 items for this meeting. The first item is AU 1.1, the Auditor General's 2022 Annual Report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office. We have a presentation on that item, and so I will hold that item. AU 1.2 is the Auditor General's Office 2023 Work Plan. There is also a combined presentation on that item, so I will hold that item. AU 1.2A is the Auditor General's Office 2023 Operating Budget. Again, a combined presentation, so that item will be held. AU 1.3 is Auditor General's 2022 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. There's also a presentation on that item, so I will hold that item. AU 1.4 is the Auditor General's 2022 Status Report on Outstanding Recommendations. Are there any members with questions or wishing to hold that item? Councillor Nunziata moves Audit Report AU 1.4. All those in favour? Any opposed? And that item is carried. AU 1.5 is Building Better Outcomes, Audit out of Toronto's Building Inspection Function. There is a presentation on that item, so I will hold it. AU 1.6 is the results of the 2021 External Quality Control Review. Are there any members of the committee with questions on that item or wish to hold it? Seeing none, I will offer the very brief comment of course, congratulations once again to the Auditor General's Office for excellent results in the External Quality Control Review. May I have a motion from the committee to adopt the item? Councillor Myers moves the adoption of the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item carries. AU 1.7, getting to the root of the issues, February 2023, performance update of urban forestry contractors and city crews. Are there any questions about that item? Any members wishing to hold? I am going to hold the item. I think we can dispose of that very quickly. We're just getting a motion in order for that particular matter, and we'll deal with that in order. So that item will be held. Yep. AU 1.8 is update from the Controller on action plans and implementation of recommendations arising from the KPMG audit for the year 2020. We have a presentation from the controller, so I will hold that item in my name. AU 1.9 is ARENA's 2021 audited financial statements and status of outstanding 2021 and prior audited financial statements. Are there any questions about that particular item? Any members wishing to hold it? Councillor Nunziata moves, but we have a motion coming on that, I think, Mr. Clerk. Yep, so we'll hold that. I think that'll be a fairly straightforward matter as well when that comes up. So you can put that in my name. AU 1.10, financial statements for the years ended December 31st, 2021, City of Toronto Corporations and Partnered Corporation consideration. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Anyone wishing to hold that item? May I have a motion to move the item? Councillor Nunziata moves the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. AU 1.11. KPMG Audit Planning Report for the year ended December 31st, 2022. Are there any questions on that item? Pardon me. Thank you. There is a presentation. It's missing from my notes here. So that item will be held for a presentation. AU 1.12, KPMG Management Letter for the City of Toronto with management responses for the period ended December 31st, 2021. Are there any questions on that item? There's a presentation available from KPMG. Is it available? Is it just the one? It's just the one. Oh, sorry. It's just the one. Okay. So we'll just check. Any members with questions on that? Anyone wishing to hold the item? May I have a motion to move the item? Moved by Councillor Myers. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. Okay, so we will go back up to the top of the list. We'll get to that in just a moment. Thank you. Okay, there are no speakers registered on 1.1, but there are speakers registered on later items, so we will get to those in order. At this point in time, we will look at AU 1.1, which is the Auditor General's 2022 Annual Report, demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's Office. I will welcome Madam Auditor Tara Anderson, Ariane Chan, and I think Matthew Crisafulli to the podium. Sorry, I did not include Ina Chan.
Thank you. So thank you and good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors, staff, and members of the public. As you know, this is my first year as Auditor General for the City of Toronto, and I'm very honored to present the excellent work and value of my office. The Municipal Code requires that we report out annually on the activities of our office, including savings realized, which we do through our annual report. And this presentation is on our 2022 annual report, which demonstrates the value of our office. I'll provide a few highlights from 2022, and then I'll walk you through the 3 key areas of our performance: adding value to the city, making a positive difference, and showing leadership. And then I'll finish off with my final remarks. So our 2022 highlights included issuing 9 reports with more than 95 recommendations and a return on investment for our office of $12.52. And our reports for 2022 were focused on 3 themes, as you can see here. The first was on emergency response services. So we had our 2 Toronto Police Service reports, our first on the 911 operations, and the second was identifying opportunities to support more effective responses to calls for service. The second theme was on addressing housing priorities and improving outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. We had 3 reports in this area. The first was on shelters and case management. The second was on shelters and hotel operations. And the third was on legacy rental replacements. The third theme was cybersecurity, and we had 3 reports in this area. Our first was on TTC Phase 1. We had another on Toronto Fire Services, and the third was on open source internet data intelligence. Additionally, we issued a major investigation report, and our fraud and waste hotline received 1,032 complaints, the highest since the launch of our program, and we have a separate annual report on our fraud and waste hotline and a presentation on that report. So the first area I'll speak about are the financial benefits of our work that add value to the city, which includes money the city has saved as a result of our recommendations. Many of our audit recommendations result in financial benefits for the city once implemented. We've referred to these financial benefits as savings in our annual report, and they can include both operating and capital and the following types: cost reductions, future cost avoidance, new or increased revenue streams, and efficiency improvements. Every year, we quantify savings and our return on investment, and the Audit Committee has always recognized the importance of this. Our annual report explains how we determine the savings estimates, but I'll briefly explain this particularly for the benefit of the new Audit Committee members. So we recognize one-time and annually recurring savings projected for a 5-year period, even though the financial benefits may in many instances extend beyond the 5 years. The total cumulative savings estimate includes the past annual 5 reports. And when calculating these figures, we always aim to be conservative. We recognize only the net amount of any implementation costs, and we only recognize the savings once they're realized. So we don't simply take an estimate of potential savings from our reports, but we wait until the work has been done to implement our recommendations and that it's properly supported. And then that supporting information is reviewed by our staff and discussed with management. Using this conservative approach, the city achieved a total cumulative estimated savings of $398 million over the last 5 years of our 5 annual reports for 2018 to 22 by implementing our recommendations. And keep in mind that this includes savings from cost avoidance and the other types of financial benefits I've just outlined. This means that for every dollar invested in our office, there was a return of investment of $12.52. This slide demonstrates how the $398 million is a cumulative amount of a one-time and annually recurring amounts projected over a 5-year period for each of our past 5 annual reports, as shown in Table 1 on page 30 of our annual report. And then each annual report has a similar table for that year to help illustrate the cumulative savings from the most recent 5 years of annual reports. This is the same methodology used by our office for many years, and it goes back to the time of Toronto's first Auditor General. And just to note that it is normal for these amounts to fluctuate from year to year, as it will depend on the timing of when management implements our recommendations and the cost savings associated with those recommendations. And in 2022, as you can see from that purple box, the city realized $14.6 million in one-time and annually recurring savings projected over 5 years. And we'll break that down a bit more on the next slide. So on this slide, we have Table 2, found on page 32 of our annual report, which shows the reports where the city realized savings in 2022 and how the divisions have reflected these financial benefits in their 2023 budgets, or if not, the reason why. And the combined one-time and annually recurring savings projected over 5 years from these 5 reports, together with payment recoveries from fraud-related matters, total the $14.6 million in 2022. Our annual report includes write-ups reviewed by the respective division and agency to explain each of these savings from these reports and the type of financial benefit realized in 2022. It's important to note that divisions are now required to reflect their savings from implementing our recommendations in their budgets, and this is a change that was brought about by City Council Direction 2019, so thank you, Councillor Nunziata, and was supported by the Audit Committee, and is seen as an innovative practice. My office and financial planning partnered together in a collaborative fashion on a process to help flag and achieve mutual agreement with divisions and agencies on what impacts included in the budget are related to our recommendations. And we're continuing to work together with financial planning to ensure continued and increased transparency of how our recommendations link to savings in the citywide budgets. As you can see in the budget column on the far right-hand side, we've made reference to how the savings are reflected in each division's budget and the page numbers. So you can see the ones there for Children's Services and the review of wheel transfer TTC. It's also important to note that there are some financial impacts that you won't see in a budget and they're not expected to be, and we explain the reason why that is. So you can see the codes there. We have legends in our report. NP is non-program or corporate-wide savings, and these are citywide savings that get pushed down to the divisional budget, and it won't show as a cost reduction in a specific divisional budget. So for example, we have here the savings from the cost of printing and mailing individual pay stubs to employees because city employees have remote access to employee self-service and they don't need to have the pay stubs mailed to them. AC are avoided costs, so these are not reflected in the budget because they do not represent a reduction to or an enhancement of a base budget requirement. The IY, the last one there, is in-year recoveries, and those might not be budgeted for because they were billed and collected in 1 year, and here it's a one-time financial benefit. So here our example is the collection of past due rents and operating costs from our audit of lease administration of city-owned properties. To highlight a couple of examples, this is an example from our fleet services audits. There were total estimated savings of $3.9 million as a result of implementing our report recommendations. There was no impact to fleet services budget because these represent avoided costs. So these were costs avoided from claiming new vehicle warranty claims for the city fleet instead of the city incurring the maintenance costs, and costs avoided from less damages caused from operating the city fleet without care. This next example is one where it has been reflected in the division's budget for children's services. So in 2022, the division completed the transfer of its remaining 194 kindergarten and school-age childcare spaces in city-run child centers to the local school boards. The division reflected a reduction in their 2023 operating budget of $1.4 million with no overall service level impacts. So over a 5-year period, that translates into a benefit of approximately $7 million in savings. Our audits are not just about the money, though. In the next few slides, I'll show how the non-financial benefits of our work result in positive difference. For example, improved internal controls, clearer policies and procedures, improved efficiency and effectiveness of the city's programs, systems, and processes, and ultimately, better outcomes on important issues that affect Torontonians' daily lives. This is the area where our audits can have an impact on people. The reports we issued in 2022 all have impactful findings and recommendations that will bring about non-financial benefits, including a positive impact on people, and this includes the city's most vulnerable people. For the next few slides, we've included some acknowledgements from management and other stakeholders who expressed appreciation on the value of our work, and this was often a reflection on the non-financial benefits. For our 2 Toronto Police Service reports, we aim to, for the first report, provide better support for staff and improve data, information management, and outcomes of TPS's 911 operations that will help improve timeliness of answering 911 calls and appropriate emergency responses. The second report was to identify opportunities for TPS to support more effective responses to calls for service, and for the city and TPS to work together to explore alternative responses for some calls for service. We emphasized in these reports as well as our related Key Common Themes report, that this is a journey of change. And some of the most important recommendations involve the key stakeholders, so that's Toronto Police Service, some of the city divisions, and the union, Toronto Police Association, coming together, sharing information, and moving forward to make the improvements together, such as exploring and developing non-police alternative responses. Toronto Police Association was on board with our work and recommendations, and as you can see from this quote, they publicly acknowledge the value of our work, and the stakeholders are meeting and working together to take action on our recommendations. For the 2 audits of emergency shelters, management said that our findings and insight were extremely valuable, both as it relates to the work they do with clients, as well as the services they procure. These audits will help to improve services for some of the most vulnerable people in our city. Our recommendations aim to, for the first report, improve outcomes for emergency shelter clients through an increased focus on case management. So this will help guide individuals and families experiencing homelessness towards permanent, stable housing more efficiently and effectively. And the second report was to improve how the city manages and monitors key contracted services, including use of hotels as temporary emergency shelters for people experiencing homelessness, and better oversight and contract management of these shelters means more funds and rooms can go directly towards making sure there's enough shelter beds, especially in the winter months, or towards creating more permanent housing to address homelessness. And non-financial benefits also include those resulting from our cybersecurity reports to strengthen the safety of the city's IT systems and infrastructure against cyber attacks. And our work in 2022 included the Toronto Transit Commission and Toronto Fire Services, as well as a follow-up of Toronto Water SCADA system. And you can see here, management from Toronto Water expressed their appreciation for the critical cybersecurity measures we recommended to further protect Toronto water systems and infrastructure for Toronto residents. City staff are implementing our recommendations to maximize the benefit to both the city and the public. Management is moving forward to achieve outcomes, and in our annual report, we highlight in these purple boxes shown on the slides management's action taken on the report since published. Our audits shine a light on issues and provide recommendations, but management are the ones that implement those recommendations so the change happens. I'd like to thank city management and staff for their cooperation and assistance on the audits and their hard work in making progress on our report recommendations. And finally, I'll discuss how our office shows leadership. We are continuing to be leaders in our profession, and auditors also get audited. We are required to undergo an external quality assurance review every 3 years, and in 2022, an international team from the Association of Local Government Auditors completed a review of our office, and our office received the highest possible rating, an unqualified pass opinion, and it's the 6th time our office has received that rating. Other audit organizations are coming to us, so we're recognized for our innovative approach to work, the quality of our reports, and the use of videos to effectively communicate our findings, and the quantifiable impact of our work. Staff from our office also serve as active members on various local government audit industry committees and boards that foster the growth of the profession. So in summary, our office continues to demonstrate value. First, financially, the city achieved total cumulative estimated savings of $398 million over 2018 to 22, and our office had a return on investment of $12.52. Second, we're helping the city to make a positive difference in people's lives. In 2022, our Toronto Police Service audits, shelter audits, and cybersecurity audits all have significant and impactful recommendations that will help the city to achieve better outcomes for people. And third, we're recognized as leaders in our profession. But of course, we could only achieve this through our amazing team. And we have an incredible executive team and hardworking, dedicated professional staff who work very long hours to complete these audits and produce these reports. And I'm very grateful to each and every one of them. We also have a very diverse team, and that further strengthens our office and the work that we do. Thank you to my team, and many of them are here today. So thank you, or online. As I move forward through my 7-year term as Auditor General, You have my commitment that I will continue to strengthen this important and impactful role and the work of our office. Thank you to the Audit Committee for supporting this role and our office, and I look forward to assisting City Council in providing accountability for achieving value for money in city operations and making a positive difference together. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. We do have a question already from the committee, so we'll ask Councillor Nunziata to go ahead, and we'll take any other members wishing to question. Just let me know.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. And so just a couple questions. You mentioned the pay stubs. So for a while, we were not receiving them by mail, but now we are. So I don't know if you're aware of that.
Okay. I'll have to take that away. I know that during COVID, I think some were receiving them by mail, and then there was a slow adoption in terms of city employees having access to the employee self-serve, and then that adoption rate was increased, which resulted in those savings. But I will take that away. Yeah,
we actually we have for a while now, and so I was just wondering that because with your presentation. So the previous report that came in from Shelter Housing, a number of recommendations. So how many of those recommendations have been adopted yet?
Management's agreed to all recommendations.
Yeah.
You're asking about the action
Yeah.
taken? Do you want to speak to that?
Through the chair, these reports were from Through the chair, these reports were from 2022, so as part of our normal follow-up process, we would normally give some time to implement the recommendations and then go back and follow up to see if they've been implemented. Mr. Tanner could probably answer questions on current status, but as part of our normal follow-up process, you'd be getting regular updates on the implementation of those recommendations.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Cole?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you very much for the incredible work that your small office does and the amount of savings that it brings so that we could use taxpayers' dollars for real services and not waste. So again, outstanding work for such a small group of people, so well done. A question I have is about the shelter services. With the hotels, you had an excellent auditor's report on the $320 million we spent on hotels. Was that for 1 year or 2021?
Through the chair, I don't have the report with me right now, but I believe whatever we had in the report was around that, and that I'd have to go back and check. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But and in your audit of the hotel program for temporary shelter, you found that a lot of the hotel owners and operators were overcharging the city. Have we been able to recoup any of that money that these hotel operators overcharged the city for? That was one of the recommendations I think you had in your report, that we should pursue means of recouping those dollars that were wrongfully charged.
I believe we'd have to refer that question to legal and may have to go in camera on that question.
Do you want to do that now?
Councillor Cole, the clerk advises that we could go into confidential session. We have to be very clear on that process. I don't know if you want to check behind you to see if the staff will be in a position to answer the question right now. If you want to let me know, we'll go into that process. We can stand the item down.
So I'm not quite sure whether I can ask staff privately a public question that is supposed to be in camera. I'm not sure whether I can do that.
They are nodding their head yes, right behind you. But if it's the wish of the committee, we can certainly do that. I just want to give them fair warning because I don't know if they've got the answer at their fingertips.
Well, I'll hold that down, and I'll speak to staff and give them some time to give me an update on their cost recovery efforts.
So if it's the will of the committee, we can hold this down and we can come back to it later in the list and we can make a decision about what to do. Not a problem, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another question I had is about the 911 calls. What was the essential problem that you illustrated in your report on the Toronto Police Services 911 call system?
So part of it in terms of the timeliness is when people call 911. And so during the peak periods, often people were waiting longer amounts of time. So it's important to have the proper data to be able to analyze and staff up to make sure that the peak periods as well have enough staff so that those, to try and meet those standards of timeliness of calls.
Did you compare response times 911 from year over year, or how were you able to ascertain that there was a delay during peak periods on 911 calls?
We did analyze data from 2018 to 2021.
And what did you find was the increase in delay between 18 and 21? How much more an increase was there in delay?
I'd have to get back to you on that question. But there were wait times as long as, 1 minute to 4 minutes in some instances.
Okay, anyways, I can get that information from you later. Okay, anyways, thank you very much again for your outstanding work that goes on quietly, that is rarely the interest of the media, but is a real cost-saving effort whereby we can ensure tax dollars are used for those right purposes. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions from the committee? I am going to take a chance to ask one myself. Set my own timer, though. I wonder, Madam Auditor, if you could explain the difference in the relationship between that you have with council and that with what you have with your work with the Toronto Police Services Board. Because I want to make sure that I understand it. You bring the items up in the Auditor General's report, but I know that your relationships are a bit complex. And if you could let us know how that works.
Sure. So as part of my mandate under the City of Toronto Act and the Municipal Code, I have access to do audits and access to information for all the city divisions and many of the agencies and corporations. There are a few restricted entities, and Toronto Police Service would be one of them. So in that case, I must be invited in by Toronto Police Services Board in order to do audits of Toronto Police. And they have invited us in. So it had been a period of about 10 years where we had not done work of Toronto Police Service, and then they did invite us in to do the work. And so we actually have a 5-year audit plan for Toronto Police that's been approved by the Toronto Police Services Board.
Thank you. And sometimes we see audit work that pertains to the city's agencies and corporations. And is it a fair observation that you will often do that work and then you will work through their boards first? And then you will come to the committee to let us know, just in terms of process, because they're the closest to the issue. And I think we saw that with TTC and TCHC, but the relationship in those instances is a little different. Have I got that right? Because you can audit those entities without them necessarily inviting you there.
That's correct. So through you, Chair. So for the agencies and corporations, we would go through, in terms of our reports, they'd first go through their audit committee and board, and then they would go to the city's audit committee and city council. And for police or library, it would first go through their board and then to the city audit committee and city council. However, the members of Toronto Police Service and the board, they would not be expected to necessarily come to the city's audit committee to answer questions because of the different governance model.
Thank you. I didn't have any other questions. I'll just check with any members of the committee. Any other questions? Seeing none. Councillor Myers, question? Of course.
Thank you. Through the chair, and yeah, I'd just like to echo what my colleagues say and thank you for doing the incredible work that you do to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Just a quick question. You said you had not audited the Toronto Police Services Board or Toronto Police Services for 10 years. Was that because you were denied a request or that you had just not had requested one?
We just weren't invited to come in by the board during those 10 years. There was a change in leadership, and they were very welcoming and appreciative of us to come in and of our work that we've done.
So in the previous 10 years, had you requested, or do you have to wait to be invited? Had you requested to provide audit services and you were denied, or were you have to wait and to be invited by the police services to do an audit?
I think through the chair, I believe they realized, because we had done audits in the past, in the 10 years prior, we had done a few audits, so I believe they were aware that our services were available. They just had not invited us in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Are there any members wishing to speak on this item? All right, I'll take a chance very quickly then, just to say once again, thank you for the presentation and of course for the work of the entire office. It's the team, but under your leadership and the leadership of your predecessor, these are incredible things. And the comment that I'd leave for the committee and anyone that's joined us new is, this committee is so much more than financials and money. And many of us, despite how we have a political approach to things as members of council, we often look for value and improve public services, but the committee is about human beings and humans throughout the Toronto Public Service and humans that access our services and rely on them for so many important aspects of their life. And that's why when audits come up, I call them supper table conversations, because I truly believe that they end up on people's supper tables and they talk about something they saw in the news and how something is changing for the better. And we've seen impacts from this audit committee that go way beyond the financials. They go way beyond just the reputational value that they bring to the city, but to changing the world for a better place, for a safer place, for a more human place. And so I truly appreciate the privilege of serving on the committee and truly appreciate the work of a dedicated team. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to suggest we just vary the procedure a little bit in that I may invite the team to stay up there for audit. I'm sorry, we'll take a motion to recommend that City Council receive the item, if I remember correctly. We'll take a motion on the item from the committee. A motion to adopt the item from the Councillor Cole. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. So just a suggestion that you remain up there for the presentation, then we will hear from our speaker, and then we'll go to questions. So why don't I invite you to go ahead on the presentation for AU 1.2 and 1.2A. So that is the Auditor General's Office 2023 Work Plan and the Auditor General's Office 2023 Operating Budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this next presentation is on my office's 2023 work plan. I'll provide a brief summary of our office's budget request and then walk through how our audits are selected and coverage of past reports, key areas of audit focus for this year, our 2023 work plan, and other significant work. It's important to note that although in prior years our budget would have gone through Audit Committee to City Council, it is included for information purposes only this year as context for our 2023 work plan. Starting this year with the new Bill 3 requirements and strong mayor powers, our budget request now goes directly through Budget Committee to City Council, and that is why our operating budget report is now included as a sub-item of the work plan, as it is for information purposes only this year. But I'll include just a few highlights of our 2023 budget request. So we've requested a total of $7.35 million, and this represents 0.045% of the city's 2023 proposed operating budget. It reflects a 4% base budget decrease from our 2022 council-approved budget, and it includes $270,000 of savings, one-time savings, from anticipated staff vacancies, which we expect to fill by the end of Q1 this year. And it's important to note that this budget request supports three things I'd like to highlight. Completing high-priority audit projects on our work plan that yield both quantifiable and non-quantifiable benefits to how the city delivers its services. Number two, providing valuable, independent oversight of critical systems to ensure the city is well-positioned to detect, mitigate, and respond to IT and cybersecurity risks. And third, conducting investigations into high-risk allegations. So before we walk through our 2023 work plan, I think it's important to keep in mind how we select audits to include on our plan. And our office conducts a citywide risk and opportunity assessment every 5 years, and the risk factors used are in attachment 1 to your report, and include factors such as financial significance, public interest, and adequacy of controls. We then update our risk assessment every year for any emerging issues and trends, including trends in allegations received through our fraud and waste hotline. We also consider input from city management and city councilors, and we use the knowledge we've developed through our previous audits and our follow-up work. We aim to have audit coverage across the various city divisions, agencies, and corporations. Next slide. This slide shows the coverage we've achieved over the past 5 years with our reports. And you can see that we have breadth in our coverage, as well as more in-depth coverage on certain areas, including technology services, Toronto Transit Commission, and shelter support and housing administration. You can find a listing of our past reports from 2018 to 2022 in attachment 2 to our report. For 2023, we plan to continue our focus on certain areas, such as the housing continuum, cybersecurity and IT systems, emergency response services, and major agencies and corporations, including TTC and TCHC. We've also included audits in the infrastructure area to ensure sufficient coverage of the divisions and risks and opportunities. It's also important to note that the 2023 work plan is intended to be flexible, allowing myself as Auditor General to respond to emerging issues, including the need to assign resources to investigations into high-risk allegations when needed. Next. So this shows our 2023 work plan, if you want to go next, okay. On the left are the projects we've planned for this year. The ones that you see in green are those that we currently have in progress. The blue ones are ones that we've just recently started, and the one at the bottom in black font has not yet been started, but we will start this year. The ones with red stars are those that are restricted entities. So if you recall the question that I just recently received, those are the restricted entities such as Toronto Police Service, Toronto Public Library, and Toronto Hydro, where we need to be and have been invited in by the board. And then on the right-hand side are the projects on the horizon for 2024, and a few of those could potentially be started in late 2023, contingent on available resources and depending on other priorities. As you may be aware, if there is an audit that you'd like added to the audit work plan, you would need to make a motion for myself as Auditor General to consider it, or there can be a City Council 2/3 majority resolution to add the audit. Audits cannot be deleted from my work plan, and please keep in mind that we would need to defer another audit on the plan in order to add one. So our key areas of focus in this year's work plan, so the same work plan broken down by these categories. So on the far left is our housing continuum. So that remains to be a priority for the city. And we're currently working on a modular housing audit, and we also have an audit of affordable housing on the horizon. For the second area of cybersecurity, we continue our focus on cybersecurity with audits at TTC for Phase 2, Toronto Hydro, and we have one on the horizon for Toronto Public Library. In addition, we've also started an audit of the city's enterprise work management system, so that's a large IT system. And on the horizon, we have an audit of major IT projects, as well as software acquisition and license utilization. Infrastructure is another key area of focus for us this year, and later in today's meeting, we'll be presenting an audit report on the Toronto Building Inspection Function. We also have a Toronto Building Investigation in progress, and we've started the second phase of our Toronto Building Audit with the focus on plan review and customer service. We're also in progress on an audit of winter road maintenance, and on the horizon, our work includes an audit of MLS short-term rentals and the municipal accommodation tax, street construction and utility work, and the basement flooding protection program. For the next column of emergency response services, we'll start the audit of 911 Emergency Response of Toronto Fire and Paramedic Services, and on the horizon, we have an audit of fire fleet, maintenance, and an operational audit of Toronto Police Service. For agency and corporation audits, so that's the last column on the right, we're in progress on an audit of TTC streetcar operations, and the audits on our horizon include TTC Workforce Planning and Management and TCHC Contract Management. For some other audits not on this slide, but they were on the previous slide, they include a Parks Branch operational review, a non-competitive contract for category management and strategic sourcing, and unsolicited proposals through the Toronto Office of Partnerships. We also have an extensive backlog of 63 potential audits, and you can find this backlog listing as Attachment 3 to the report. In addition to our audits, we have other significant areas of work, and this includes our recommendation follow-up. So we have a significant number of outstanding recommendations, 694, and management have self-assessed about 40% of those as fully implemented. So we'll continue our work to verify the implementation status of high-priority recommendations, and for this year, we plan to focus on corporate real estate management, transportation services, purchasing and materials management, parks, forestry and recreation, and Toronto Transit Commission. And there's a separate report on our follow-up work today that was AU 1.4 on the agenda. The second area is our fraud and waste hotline, and we expect to see a continuing high volume of complaints. And our forensic unit also conducts investigations into high-risk allegations and follows up on those that they've referred to divisions for investigation. So there's also a separate report on today's agenda, AU 1.3, on our annual report for that area. But it's important to note that oftentimes we have to supplement those two teams with our audit staff, and that can sometimes delay some of our audit projects. So to recap, the audits selected for this 2023 work plan keep pace with risks and emerging issues, consider input received, including any city council motions, and provide coverage across the city, with the goal to continue to assist city council in holding management accountable for providing value for money in city operations, and to help the city to make a difference in the lives of Torontonians and to add value to the city, including continued cost savings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. And just as a reminder to the committee, we do have a speaker on this item, and so we will move to the speaker phase before we take questions. We'll just give this a moment for the changeover, and I'll call the speaker in a moment. Okay, for item 1.2, Auditor General's Office 2023 Work Plan, we have a registered speaker, Derek Moran. Welcome to the Audit Committee, Derek. You have 5 minutes, and go ahead when you're ready.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent, express or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless His Majesty the King, and long live His Majesty the King. Let the record show that I do not consent to the warrantless searches taking place downstairs here at Toronto City Hall. Let the record also show that tomorrow it will have been 3 months since Jim Hart left the Toronto Police Services Board, and Public Appointments has still not replaced him, and in doing so is not in compliance with 2 subsections of Section 27 of the Police Services Act. So a good starting point for the Auditor General Office's work plan. Just for people who don't know, if Ferdinand could put this up on the projector here for a sec. He told me just to cue him and that he put this up on the...
It's coming.
Okay. Okay, so something that her predecessor, Beverly Romeo Breeler, said, that my first statement is always, but be clear on the law. So that being said, I just want everyone to know what the Federal Court of Appeal said in Canada Minister of Public Works and Government Services versus the High Rise Group Incorporated, 2004, that the public's right to know how government spends public funds as a means of holding government accountable for its expenditures is a fundamental notion of responsible government that is known to all. In R versus Boulanger, 2006, the Supreme Court of Canada said that public officials are therefore made answerable to the public in a way that private actors may not be. And some more rules. I mean, really, who reads the City of Toronto Act? Because it's about a mile long, right? Section 1.1 of the City of Toronto Act says that the City of Toronto exists for the purpose of providing good government with respect to matters within its jurisdiction, and the City Council is a democratically elected government which is responsible and accountable. Section 2 says, the purpose of this act is to create a framework of broad powers for the city which balances the interests of the province and the city and which recognizes that the city must be able to do the following things in order to provide good government. Subsection 4, ensure that the city is accountable to the public and that the process for making decisions is transparent. Section 212.1 of the City of Toronto Act says, the city shall adopt and maintain policies with respect to the following matters. Subsection 5, the manner in which the city will try to ensure that it is accountable to the public for its actions and the manner in which the city will try to ensure that its actions are transparent to the public. And this is from the Supreme Court of Canada in 2009, where, it's the City of Toronto versus CUPE, Local 79. Supreme Court of Canada said that a third aspect of the rule of law is that the exercise of all public power must find its ultimate source in a legal rule. It provides a shield for individuals from arbitrary state action, because arbitrary state action is not permissible. So I have an actual deputation to make. I appoint Auditor General Tara Anderson to act as the trustee for me in this matter, and respectfully direct her to get City Solicitor Wendy Wahlberg to show her exactly where in law it's written that members of the public can't ask questions of their public servants at these various City of Toronto public meetings. Because I'll tell you something, during the last election, I know there's another by-election coming up soon, I actually bumped into the councillor from my area, Mike Cole here. He was canvassing behind the road there, behind North Toronto Community Centre, where the baseball diamonds are. And I told him about how I spoke at the Board of Health, and I asked a question of Joe Cressy, and he hung up on me with 45 seconds left in my time. He was so, I guess, irate that I dare ask a question. And to his credit, I asked Mike Cole what's his stance on members of the public being able to ask questions at these meetings is. And to his credit, he said, well, I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. You know, I'd be in favor of members of the public asking questions. He also added to me, he said, I'll tell you something else. I've asked questions myself here at some of these council meetings or these meetings, and I haven't gotten questions from staff myself. So, you know from Special Governance Committee, Councillor Holiday, that there are some Toronto Council members, since Mayor Tory took over, that will lie to the public that we can't ask questions at these meetings, and that there is actually no rule, specific rule, but the AG is going to find out, that says we can't ask questions at these meetings.
Thank you, Derek. Are there any members of the committee that wish to ask a question of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you. I will now that I've sort of found my voice again, may I ask if the members of the committee have questions of staff regarding AU 1.2 or 1.2A? Councillor Myers, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, on page 6 of 13 of the work plan, transportation, item 4, number 4, transportation services review of winter maintenance contract procurement and management. Could the AG please just provide a bit of color or more detail on what exactly the review will entail?
Thank you. So through the chair, this was a city council motion directing some of this work in terms of looking at the NRFP, which will be part of that work. And it also includes a follow-up review of the work done by winter maintenance, including on the current contract that they have for winter road maintenance.
Thank you. Does your work review looking at potential liability for the city in terms of negligence of snow clearing in the contracts itself?
I don't believe that that is part of our scope for this particular audit.
Would that normally be part of the scope of the Auditor General, looking at specific legal liability in city contracts, or would that be legal?
I believe that would normally be a legal matter.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on to attachment 3. For the budget requested by the Auditor General, do you believe that you have the funds funds needed to start tackling the backlog of project listed?
We provide that backlog listing to track potential audits, but our budget request covers our 2023 work plan, particularly the left-hand column of the slide that I showed, which was specific for 2023. And if we have enough resources, then we would start some of those we have on our horizon.
Do you have an estimate of how much it would cost to start tackling this backlog of projects?
No, I don't have it.
No? Okay. Could you provide a bit of color as to, on page 2 of 3, Toronto Police Services race-based data collection, 29, number 30, Toronto Police Services response to mental health calls, and 32, Toronto Police Services use of body camera evaluation. Why exactly do you want to review those specific areas?
So when Toronto Police Services Board invited us in, they actually asked if we would do a full risk assessment, similar to what we do for the citywide risk and opportunity assessment in developing our regular audit work plan. So we did that risk assessment specific to Toronto Police Service, and through that risk assessment, we identified those potential audits for our 5-year plan, and so that's what came to the surface, and that was approved by the Toronto Police Services Board.
So there's no specific risk that you're worried about? Those are just general items that came up?
At this point, they're really more general themes, and so typically, as we start to plan an audit, then we get more in-depth into the full-blown risk assessment in that particular area, and then we develop our scope, our audit objectives and criteria and whatnot.
Great. And does that same answer apply to number 52, Revenue Services Vacant Home Tax, and number 63, Office of Emergency Management Business Continuity Management Program? It's just, you're just identifying specific, general areas.
That's correct, yes.
Great. And then on page 7, regarding the discretionary reserve fund for the Auditor General,
Yes?
is that part of the budget that you've requested for 2023?
So that was a separate request. So we brought that request for a discretionary reserve fund to Audit Committee in July of last year. It was referred to Executive Committee. It has now been referred to the CFO and Treasurer. So that was referred to Executive Committee as part of this year's budget. And then it has now been referred by Executive Committee to the CFO and Treasurer to consider for next year's budget. So we do not have a discretionary reserve fund.
And will the lack of a discretionary reserve fund in any way impede your work?
It would have been helpful to, with our projects, especially those where we need to contract with specialists on our IT work and our investigations, and particularly for the projects that run over the year end, because the reserve fund was only meant to go for those professional service contracts, and only up to a maximum of about, I think, 400,000 maximum.
And just quickly, what was the exact amount requested in the reserve fund? For the reserve fund? Roughly?
I'm going to refer to my Deputy Auditor General, Ina Chan.
So through the chair, in the July 2022 report, we had indicated that it would be a maximum of 5% of our budget, which for 2022 was $380,000.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Myers. Are there any other questions for the Auditor General? Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of your work plan for 2023, you made a request in the budget process, right, to enable you to do your work for the upcoming year. Did you get all of the money you requested for so you can do your work?
So that will be before City Council tomorrow, I believe, or on Wednesday, in terms of the approval. But the budget that we've requested would be sufficient to enable us to do our 2023 work plan.
So it is sufficient.
Yes.
Could you use more money to get more money back?
Well, we
In
could always,
savings?
sure, we could always use more money, although we do need to staff up. So we do have vacancies that we're working to fill right now.
So how many vacancies do you have right now?
We've got about 9 vacancies
And when do you hope to fill them?
by the end of Q1 this year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Are there other questions? Seeing none, I'll ask some of my own. The backlog of audits is a list that we've seen exist for some time. I wondered, Madam Auditor, if you could comment how you weight the backlog of audits with the new requirements that come in through the year, whether it's through your risk assessment of the current environment or things that come through fraud and waste or other types of referrals.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So we look at everything in terms of risk and opportunities. So I mentioned our risk assessment and the factors that we use. So in terms of financial significance, adequacy of controls, public interest, that type of thing. And so those are factors that I need to weigh as Auditor General in terms of determining the priorities. And then, of course, if there's the City Council motions, those are considered as well.
Thank you. And just to follow up on what Councillor Cole said and asked about, and the answer that you provided was you are in the process of staffing up, but would it be your belief that if the Auditor General's function was further resourced, you could deliver more both savings and other benefits to the city?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I do believe we have sufficient budget in terms of delivering on the 2023 work plan, and we do need to staff up, which we are going to do. Of course, we could always, if there are more funds, we could deliver more projects and achieve more savings.
I guess my last question is, a lot of the work of the Auditor General's office has focused on cybersecurity. We don't talk a lot about it in the news. It just doesn't seem to be as an exciting story as maybe as some of the others, but nonetheless important. But at the same time, we have seen the efforts of the city, within the city, increase with respect to cybersecurity. And is that a natural progression, that something that may have begun in the Auditor General's office has proceeded into more of a program or a permanent thing at the city? And would those type of resources or increases in areas, or are there other areas where the city could increase its focus to take some of the work off of your plate in a very natural, progressive format?
So through you, Chair, I'm not sure that it would take work off of our plate, but there are certain areas where we've identified key common themes where our audit reports tend to come back to those time and time and again. You mentioned the IT area, and the city has put resources into that area, now has the CISO, and they're doing some good work. There's also the area of contract management. That's another one that comes up time and time again. So ensuring the design of the contracts and managing the contracts is done well, because that helps to mitigate risks and often results in cost savings. So that's an area.
Thank you. I had no other questions. Councillor Nunziata, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you're short 9 staff members, and hopefully you'll get them in place by the first quarter. So once you get those additional 9 staff members, that will help with the workload, and you'll be able to do a lot more
Definitely.
once you staff it, right?
Yes.
And you have the money in your budget for that, for those 9. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion, which is that the Audit Committee recommend that City Council receive the Auditor General's 2023 work plan for information. Councillor Nunziata moves the recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And I'll just confirm here for number 1.2. The clerk advises that we do not need to do a motion for 1.2. So that is the item. Thank you. 1.2A, we don't need to move a motion. All right, so AU 1.3 is the Auditor General's 2022 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Just for efficiency, I'm going to suggest that we invite the registered speaker to come and speak. Derek Moran. Welcome back to the podium, Derek. Please go ahead when you're ready. You have 5 minutes.
There's been a lot mentioned so far about the Toronto Police Service and the Toronto Police Services Board. So I just wanted to mention to Auditor General Anderson that one complaint I made to Beverly Romeo Beeler, which actually I don't think I heard back from her about, had to do with former candidate for Mayor Chris Langenfeld brought up 2 months in a row at the police board that the Toronto Police Services Board had been allegedly making payments to law firms in secrecy, which resulted in both times with then Chair Jim Hart hanging up on Chris Langenfeld. That's when we're holding the meetings over the phone. So as the chair of Budget Committee, I made an actual deputation there where I appointed Councillor Crawford to act as the trustee for me in this matter and put him on inquiry. Now when Jim Hart, Tony, and interim Chief Raymer came to the budget review meetings to beg him for more money, that Councillor Crawford inquire of Jim Hart while he was there if it was true that the Toronto Police Services Board was making payments to law firms in secrecy. And if so, how much exactly had the Toronto Police Services Board paid out to law firms in secrecy? The problem with this is that last year, Jim Hart never showed up to the budget review meetings, unlike the previous 2 years before. So another Beverly-ism that I wanted to share with everyone. She mentioned, we tend to accept that and not verify. And with an auditor, you have to trust, but then you have to verify. So for instance, I'm just kind of wondering about the vacant home tax. I'm just a curious guy. I wanted to actually look it up to see the bylaw for myself. And this is what section 197.1 of the City of Toronto Act says about bylaws. Every bylaw of the city, A, shall be under the seal of the city, and B, shall be signed by the city clerk and by the head of council or presiding officer who was at the meeting at which the bylaw was passed. Now, the problem with that is, and I really hate to drag John Elvidge into this, when I did go to verify this for myself, oh, if Ferdinand could bring that up. So there's the bylaw there. You can see certified true copy. Oh my God, look at that. John Elvidge and Councillor Nunziata must have forgot to get around to signing the bylaw. I just read in section 197, these bylaws are supposed to be signed. And here it says seal of the city. I suppose the seal of the city was supposed to be affixed there too. So I mean, I think, what is it, $1,000 fine if people don't perform the compelled speech to fill out this, well, let's call it a forced affidavit of this vacant home tax declaration. You're gonna fine people $1,000 even though you're not following the rules yourselves. Okay, like that would seem to be a fraud. You're laughing, you're grinning, Councillor Holiday, but no, but seriously, that would seem to be a fraud on its face. Also, a complaint that I made. Oh, in this report it says failure to disclose other income. The Auditor General's office received a complaint through the Fraud and Waste Hotline alleging that a member of the public and their spouse were receiving subsidies through fraudulent claims. This reminds me of an email I got back from Beverly Romeo Beeler, March 8th, 2021, where she said, "Thank you for submitting your concern with us. Your complaint to the City of Toronto Fraud and Waste Hotline is being reviewed by the Forensic Unit of the Auditor General's Office. We have assigned an internal complaint tracking number to this matter. Number 2021-00128. Please reference it in all future communications with our office." Now, it was a complaint about Dr. Eileen Davila, and I gave Beverly Romeo Beeler 3 questions to be, if she could ask Dr. Davila. 1, is it true that Dr. Davila's husband has received money before from AstraZeneca and Pfizer? 2, if so, has Dr. Davila's husband received...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. You can't tolerate this kind of innuendo, accusation about someone, and to entertain this kind of thing is totally inappropriate and out of order. We cannot accept that kind of innuendo and defamation of character at this committee. We can't accept that.
So, Councillor Holiday, just to let
Thank you. Hang on. Thank you, Councillor Cole, on your point. I will ask the speaker to remain focused on the subject of the audit committee before us.
You haven't formed the intent, or have you formed the intent to violate my freedom of expression? Like, I can't, this guy's the counselor from my area. Just to let you know.
Derek, I will ask you
Councillor
not
Holiday,
to argue with the
I brought
chair.
this up at the Board of Health meeting before. So is Chris Langenfeld. Nobody interrupted us.
Don't tell me.
They respected our freedom of expression at the Board of Health. Dr. Eileen
Derek.
Davila was sitting right there. I'm simply asking a question. It's a fair question, which should be received a yes or no answer.
Derek, please stay with the subject matter of the item before the audit committee.
Freedom of expression means you don't get to tell me what I can talk about, Councillor.
Members of the public, under council procedures, you cannot, excuse me. Would you like
Why don't you
to,
have someone from legal
Derek-
explain what
Derek,
section 32.1 of the
would you like to
Constitution says?
continue with your deputation?
Well, get someone from legal to explain.
Derek, would you like to
Peter Hogg's
continue with your
clarification,
deputation?
Section 32.1. Well, where was I? I had like before Councillor Cole here tried to violate my.
I will give you,
I think I was at like 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
you can have 60 seconds to wrap up your comments. Can you do it in the 60
I am
seconds?
posing, and I just want to make it clear, I am posing questions, all right? There's no innuendo.
You
there's
can
no
make your deputation.
he's not counselor anymore, but Denzel Menon Wong at the last executive committee meeting said that there is a shameful lack of consideration for the evidence around here. This is a question that needs to be answered. We were kept for 2 years as unconvicted prisoners. If you want to look up what the definition of a lockdown is, there is no evidence that she made any decisions based on actual science. It was all arbitrary, okay? So the second question I had for the fact that, wait a second, Beverly Romeo Beeler actually gave me a complaint number. So I assumed that she was going to ask these questions of Dr. Davila herself. 2, if so, has Dr. Davila's husband received any money from AstraZeneca and Pfizer since the beginning of the lockdown last March 13th? And 3, how much money exactly has Dr. Davila's husband received from AstraZeneca and Pfizer?
Are you complete?
No, I'm not complete. I can't believe that this place, it seems like there's a cover-up going on here because like I got interrupted at the police board. And
Derek, your
before I
time
knew
is
it,
up. Your time is up.
Clark
Thank you
Grimes
for
and Jim
joining
Hart were
us.
basically suggesting that I should get assaulted gently.
Your time is up.
Are you going to ask her this question?
Are you going to stop talking?
Are you interested in finding out the answer to this question?
Members of the public, under council procedures, you cannot disrupt the meeting. I ask you to respect the committee's proceedings and act appropriately.
I do not fall under Section 32.1 of the Constitution Act, respectfully, Councillor Holiday.
Members of the public, if you do not come to order, I will recess the meeting and order the committee room to be cleared.
Oh, I'm done
If you
anyways.
do not leave immediately,
I'm done anyways, but we'll all just sit here and pretend.
you may be removed and you will not be allowed to return to this committee meeting.
I'm done anyways, Councillor Holiday. All right? Well, you just sit there, stick your head in the sand, don't want the answer to that question. Okay.
may I call staff to come forward for a presentation? To those observing the meeting, we're just taking a moment here to complete some IT setup and we'll be right with you. Okay, members of the committee, we want to allow the staff a couple of minutes to sort out some IT issues. I'm going to just propose a 5-minute recess, no more, and we'll start that right now. Thank you to the staff as they work through some technical issues, just making sure that all the connectivity works. With that, we are back to AU 1.3, which is the Auditor General's 2022 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. And there is a presentation to the Audit Committee from Madam Auditor General. Please go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the Chair stated, this presentation is on our 2022 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline, and I'm joined by Elaine Au, Assistant Auditor General for our Forensic Unit, and Jasmine Bhatia, Director for our Forensic Unit. Although our Forensic Unit is lean, in 2022, we received and processed a significant number of complaints, the highest since the launch of this program, and also issued one major investigation report. Are you getting feedback? Maybe that can be addressed. It's important to note that we assess every single complaint that we receive. The work done by our team, both on the Fraud and Waste Hotline and in the investigations with action taken by management to address wrongdoing, are important tools to help deter fraud and waste. So thank you to my team for the excellent work they've accomplished. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through 3 areas in this presentation. First, we'll provide some background information about the Hotline program. Second, we'll look at key statistics and impacts of the Hotline. And finally, we'll briefly discuss our plan moving forward in 2023. I'll now turn it over to Jasmine Bhatia to walk you through the first 2 areas.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General, and good morning, members of Audit Committee. To begin, we would first like to remind everyone that there are several ways to report wrongdoing to the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Through our secure online form and by telephone, email, or mail. More information can be found on our website. Both our online form and calling the hotline allow for complainants to remain anonymous if they choose to do so. The hotline is governed by the Disclosure of Wrongdoing and Reprisal Protection Policy, which is part of the Toronto Public Service Bylaw. Under the bylaw, all employees have a duty to report wrongdoing. It is management's responsibility to ensure employees who report wrongdoing in good faith are protected from reprisal, and the Auditor General is required to investigate allegations of reprisal. In order to determine whether a complaint falls under the hotline's jurisdiction, we need to consider how wrongdoing is defined. Wrongdoing, as defined in the Toronto Public Service Bylaw, refers to serious actions that are contrary to the public interest, including but not limited to fraud, theft of city assets, waste, violations of the conflict of interest provisions, and breach of public trust. Allegations that do not constitute wrongdoing are referred to the appropriate city official or accountability officer for investigation and action. We receive and investigate a very broad range of complaints. Highlighted in yellow are some of the common complaints we receive. In the past year, we noticed an increase in the number of complaints related to subsidy and social assistance fraud. However, other common types of complaints relate to conflict of interest, time theft, and other types of waste or mismanagement, including misuse of city funding and vendor contract issues. Exhibit 3 of our annual report provides selected summaries which illustrate these types of complaints and how they are actioned. Now that you have a little more background on the Hotline program, we would like to go over some key statistics for 2022 on the next 2 slides. As you can see, we received 1,032 complaints representing approximately 1,200 allegations. This is a 26% increase in complaints over the prior year and the highest number of complaints received since the hotline was launched. As noted in our annual report, complaint activity may go up or down because of the dynamic nature of the hotline and as a result of various factors, including outreach activities and the nature of issues reported by the media. The increase from 2021 was mainly attributed to a rise in the number of subsidy and social assistance complaints and those which were outside the hotline's jurisdiction, meaning not directly related to the City of Toronto. In the lower section, we note that the most common method of reporting, 38%, is through our secure online form, which is directly integrated with our complaint management system. We also receive 21% of complaints through telephone calls to the hotline, and the remaining through other sources such as emails, referrals, or letters. We also assess every single complaint we receive. Last year, we implemented a new triage process to assess the risk and priority level of the allegations as they are received. This new process and risk-based approach has helped us to reduce the backlog of processing complaints and conduct at least some level of preliminary investigative inquiries on almost every complaint. On this slide, we will discuss additional statistics which demonstrate some of the outcomes of the Hotline program. In the top half, you can see of the 144 complaints that were investigated in 2022, 10% were substantiated, and this percentage will increase as more complaints are concluded. Also, almost half of the substantiated complaints were anonymous. At the bottom left of the slide, you can see the actual loss for 2022 substantiated complaints was $121,000, with a total of $27.9 million over the last 5 years. These amounts are also expected to increase as outstanding complaints are closed in 2023. The actual loss represents the dollar value lost by the city as a result of substantiating fraud or other wrongdoing that was reported through the hotline. And finally, in the bottom right-hand corner, we resolved and closed a total of 1,223 complaints, of which 864 were complaints received in 2022, and 359 were related to previous years. And of these 359 complaints, 20 of those cases were also substantiated or substantiated in part. This shows that the forensic unit manages complaints until completion, which, due to the volume and complexity of cases, is not always in the year they are received. There are also many positive impacts of the Hotline program, including actions taken by management and other important outcomes. Discipline acts as a deterrent to wrongdoing, and from the substantiated complaints, a total of 12 employees were disciplined, up to and including termination of employment. And there were 23 cases of other appropriate action taken by management, including, for example, the termination of ineligible subsidies or social assistance. This shows that when hotline complaints are received, the city takes action. Another impact is information gathering. Collecting data on complaints can help identify trends that may point to systemic issues. And secondly, complaint data is also one of the factors considered that may result in an audit being conducted. For example, the audits of contracted property management services at TCHC and also software license subscriptions were initiated in part due to data from the hotline. Other benefits of the hotline include strengthening internal controls, improving operational efficiencies, and increased deterrence and detection of fraud and wrongdoing. As you likely know, the impact of fraud is more than just financial losses. It can damage the morale of employees and negatively impact the city's reputation. Also, significant management time is required to investigate instances of fraud. Therefore, having the hotline as a deterrent is an important tool to fight fraud. In 2022, we also concluded one major investigation that resulted in a report issued to Audit Committee. This report examined a series of complaints involving the contract for installation and maintenance of traffic signs, with allegations of potential overbilling, inefficient use of time, and lack of oversight. The Auditor General reviewed these complaints and made 3 important recommendations in the report to help ensure value for money for the city on the services provided by the vendor. Thank you, and I will now pass it back over to Madam Auditor General.
Next slide. Thank you. So looking ahead to 2023, our forensic team will continue to process the high volume of incoming complaints, as well as conduct investigative work. Over the past few years, we had limited communication initiatives. However, looking forward, we're planning to raise awareness on employee responsibility to report wrongdoing to our office, and educate both city staff and the public on the types of complaints that we investigate and that our jurisdiction includes City of Toronto assets and resources. In addition, we'll continue to inform, encourage, and remind members of the public and employees about the usefulness of the Fraud and Waste Hotline program. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'd like to thank Elaine Au, Jasmine Bhatia, and our forensic team for their excellent work, and will now take any questions you may have.
Thank you to the entire team of the Auditor General's Office. Your first question is from Councillor Cole. Please go ahead.
Again, thank you for undertaking to basically provide the public with an opportunity to report these abuses. I think it's obviously a very, very fruitful undertaking that your office does. And again, as you mentioned, we're increasing in the number of, so more and more people becoming aware of it. Again, the other thing that I wonder if it's possible, maybe it's not your job in the audit division, but I find another thing that helps save money and provide benefits to the city, if we can get reports on best practices. So in some cases, city staff undertake to do things with very little cost, and it's a great way of solving a real problem. How do we possibly get either the audit division, but maybe some other department of the city, to basically encourage those best practices to be made known so other civic divisions, city divisions can undertake those best practices of saving money or getting things done quickly, and also encouraging good behavior. And that would save money too. So I'm just wondering, does anybody in any jurisdiction do that type of thing in a formal way, where we look and promote best practices as a way of, essentially getting things done better for the residents of Toronto?
Thank you, and through the chair, so I believe city management does consider best practices when they're undertaking different areas. And in terms of advisory services, that could also be something that internal audit participates in. Stuart Campbell's nodding his head there, so and may already be doing in to some extent. So I think that's a great comment, and I don't know if management wants to respond to that.
Internal audit, or?
Well, through the chair, in fact, your comments are well taken. As a matter of fact, there are some examples where, as a result of some work done through the Fraud and Waste Hotline, I've been contacted by the predecessor Auditor General, where we would undertake work to, as I say, provide better practices to business operations across the city. One illustrative example, I won't get into the specifics, but we were contacted by the Auditor General as a result of some investigative work they had performed in some of the business improvement areas. Beverly contacted me, and the premise there was, okay, I don't see any fraud there, but I might see they need better understanding of good internal control practices, which is why we have put together we put together an engagement where we more or less provided education, advice, and support on how you can implement better financial controls and practices into your operations. So that is a good illustrative example through the chair to Councillor Cole, that how internal audit interacts with some of the outcomes of these fraud and waste hotlines investigations.
I know in some private corporate entities, they have suggestion boxes on how to improve things in your workplace and how to save money or improve working conditions, whatever it is. Do we have that type of, let's say, opportunity here across the city, whereby there could be suggestions from workers, along with, again, because, we get enough, I'm sure all the councillors would know, we get, complaints by the thousands, but to get suggestions for improvements. Is there a process where at workplaces throughout the city and, in our work yards, where they can make a suggestion, say, listen, we can save money by doing this, rather than saying, we're wasting money. I don't know if that exists, that's all I'm saying, wondering.
Excuse me. To the best of my knowledge, I think that's where we rely on the fraud and waste hotline. That being said, there's no enterprise type of suggestion box, if you want to call it that. Some specific divisions, and Josie, interject if you think I'm incorrect on this, some divisions may in fact have their own unique suggestion box for process or improvement in their respective divisions, but nothing counts on an enterprise basis. I think there's reliance on what comes out of the fraud and waste hotline, because part of it will be, just as mentioned by Madam Auditor General, opportunities to improve internal control and efficiencies.
Okay, maybe I can talk to our general manager a little later about some of the practices, perhaps. I can do that offline.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Maybe there's a motion somewhere at some point there.
Yeah.
All right. Councillor Malik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. It was very educational in terms of the service, how it's being used, and what we're gleaning from it. I did want to just ask my first question about the number of cases that were closed, and the 359 that were closed that were carried over from the previous year. That seems significant, but I guess, do you have a sense of what the average amount of time is from when a complaint comes in to when the case is closed, to kind of give us some context about how that fits into what the experience has been overall with the complaints coming through the hotline?
Thank you, and through the chair. So I'll start off and then I'll turn it over to Elaine Au, our Assistant Auditor General. So it really varies by complaint, and it depends on the nature of the complaint. And so some may be very simple and may be just a basic preliminary inquiry, and others are going to be more complex and could result in an investigation where there's interviews and work and a report in the end. There was also a significant backlog that we had reduced quite a bit this past year, and so that is part of the reason for that large number. Elaine, anything you would like to add to that?
Nothing.
No? Okay. Great, thank you.
And I definitely appreciate that each complaint has to be looked at, on its own basis. If there is a sense of an average or a median that you, maybe not today, but that you can share just to give us a sense of kind of where things are landing, that would be really helpful. I guess the other piece that I'm interested in, maybe along the lines of what Councillor Cole was getting at, is around the public education piece. Which I think is really great. As you mentioned, I'm sure some of the increase in complaints is also a credit to that good work. But can you talk a little bit more about what that public education looks like, and whether that is something that is a part of the follow-up for other, like the outcome of other Auditor General reports? Because I guess we're trying to understand, well, I'm trying to understand as new member of the committee, how the public education piece factors in to the work following the reports.
Sure, and so yes, through the chair, Councillor, the public education piece is very important, and so that's something where we're going to develop a strategy for this year to determine how we're going to do that. But of course, a lot of that will be social media, on our website. For employees, perhaps we'll be doing some presentations to just further improve the awareness and understanding. Part of our increase this last year, it was complaints that were outside of our jurisdiction, so we want to make sure that the public in particular understand that we addressed complaints that relate to City of Toronto fraud and waste, and so if there's something that's outside of the City of Toronto, that would not be part of our jurisdiction. Is there anything that you wanted to add there? No? No? Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
All right, thanks.
I guess the great thing about public education is that more people know, so more people will use the opportunity, the service. Are you accounting for that in terms of the staff complement, in terms of what that might do to the response time, especially given that there was a significant jump in the last year. How are you preparing for that in the coming year?
Thank you. And through the chair, so we have had an increase in the number of complaints. The number of staff on our team has remained fairly consistent, though, so they work extra hard. But we don't have an increase in staff planned for future years at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions of staff? Councillor Nunziata, please go ahead.
Just a question on the, in your report about the abuse of sick days. Should I be asking you the question or staff? So,
You can start with
okay.
yourself, yeah.
So in your report, it says that an employee used 5 days of sick days and had another job, right? So isn't my understanding that, that an employee needs to submit in a doctor's note if they're off for more than 3 days?
Yes, that's correct, through the chair.
Yeah. So I don't understand how that happened then.
I don't know if we're able to speak to the
Oh,
details.
okay, okay, that's fine.
Anonymity.
That's fine, okay.
But just in general terms, I mean, there are internal controls that are set in place, such as,
Yeah.
you know, for sick time, it would be that there's a doctor's note provided, I believe it's
Right.
after 3 days. And so sometimes there's weaknesses or, you know, sometimes.
Yeah, I'm
you
just
don't have to
talking in
ensure-
general, but
Yeah,
it
in
is,
general.
the policy is that you submit in a doctor's note, correct? And every employee does, right? Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And just, I guess for my clarification and for those that are listening, I'll make some questions anyways. You get lots of calls, 1,200 if I remember, was what the report said. And so every one of the calls are listened to, triaged, broken down into what they say. And members of the public should take, is it true that members of the public should take comfort that everything that they submit to you is listened to carefully?
So through you, Chair, yes, every single complaint that we receive, we assess in terms and we address. So yes, we look at
Okay.
every single one.
Is it fair to say, though, that you don't necessarily report back on the outcome to the person that complained, if they chose not to be anonymous, because there's a number of ways that the issue is handled? Is that fair to say? So people shouldn't expect a direct response from you to say this is what happened because you're unable to. Is that a fair assertion?
Yes, so through you, Chair, we provide a number, as you've heard earlier, that we are looking into that complaint, but the complainants do not receive an update or a response in terms of how that has been handled and been resolved.
So the way things are handled, it may be as simple as if somebody reported a particular case where there was maybe a payment fraud or a human resource type fraud. Those are handled on a case-by-case basis. So you would refer it to the appropriate manager within the city to investigate the particulars.
Yes, through you, Chair, sorry, what was the question there?
Well, is it true to say that, you know, sometimes things come in that are case-by-case issues about an individual? So often those type of matters that come through fraud and waste, you then assign within the city to the right manager to look into, whether it's a human resource issue or a, sort of like a benefits issue from the city, that sort of thing.
Correct. So through you, Chair, yes. So we look at the complaint that comes in and we look at the definition of wrongdoing. And if it's something like employee misconduct or harassment, then that would go to a different division for investigation. And we would continue to follow up with that division in terms of how that has been handled and resolved.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily trigger an audit report. It triggers an action. And is it fair to say other issues come in that you would assess and look at and say, you know what, there is an issue here, but this again is something that you would assign to management, or you would work with somebody within the Toronto Public Service to make a correction to procedures or how they carry on business, but don't necessarily create an audit report on it? So that's a fair way that some are processed.
Yeah. So through you, Chair, yes. So a number of the allegations would be handled in that way, so it would not necessarily result in a report.
And then finally, sometimes things come in that you discover are maybe larger or more systemic, and that's when you would elevate the situation to where you would write a report and something that would come before committee. And I think you cited some examples in your materials to us, some really big reports, some very important changes coming from the Fraud and Waste Hotline.
Yes, through you, Chair, that's correct.
And so, to round it all out, people should be, is it fair to say people should be comforted that every call that's submitted to you is valuable? Maybe it's a good sign that there are more, because you use all of them, and where you can, they result in a change, whether it's something that we see in public or something that may be handled in private. Nonetheless, there's value to it.
Yes, so through you, Chair. So I think the increase in complaints is actually a positive sign that people are aware of our fraud and waste hotline, and that they're going online or calling to make sure that they're reporting they're reporting what they've seen in terms of the fraud and waste. And it's a really important tool to deter fraud and waste from happening.
Thank you very much. I'll just check any other questions from the committee. Councillor Myers?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. On page 3 of the report, it says currently the Toronto Public Service Bylaw does not require agencies and corporations to report allegations of fraud to the Auditor General's office. Is there any entity in the city who has a full picture on allegations of fraud occurring throughout the city of Toronto, including in our agencies and corporations?
So through you, Chair, we've mentioned that in our report because if we did have that, then it would provide a full comprehensive picture of potential fraud and waste across the whole city, including agencies and corporations. So that is an area where we do not currently have that fully.
And is that an area of, is that a responsibility or an empowerment that the AG is seeking or would like in order to provide a more comprehensive view of fraud in the city or alleged fraud?
Through you, Chair. So we have not included that in our budget request, but we're just flagging that that is an area that in the future, at some point, if you would like us to have that fulsome picture, we would, that is something that we do not currently have at this time.
And then on page 4 of the report, it says, city staff have an obligation to report any fraud, waste, or wrongdoing involving city resources, including suspected wrongdoing by third-party vendors. It goes on to say, it is the continued responsibility of all staff to understand their obligations to disclose wrongdoing as part of their duty to be faithful to their employer and not knowingly jeopardize its interests. So can you just describe the training that staff receive, if any, on identifying fraud, waste, or wrongdoing, and how the city is actually tracking that the employees are receiving that training?
So through the Chair, there is training available for city staff through what we call ELI. I'm not sure whether it's mandatory, is it? Okay, so it is on the TPS bylaw, so it is mandatory training for all city staff.
And how are we tracking that all city staff actually have that training?
I believe that's a question for management on how they're tracking completion of the ELI training.
Or do you know if we track it all?
I believe it is tracked.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know on cybersecurity, for example, it is tracked and they follow up if staff have not completed it.
And then so there was one report of vendors who had improperly billed the city. Do city staff know, do they know which vendors are allowed to continue to apply for contracts if they've been found to have committed fraud and/or waste?
Through the Chair, so if there has been an issue with a particular vendor and they're prohibited, that should be knowledge of those dealing with that area, presumably.
So do we have, are we sure of what policies are in place to make sure that city staff are aware that these vendors, they are not to be used going forward?
I think that may be more of a question for management.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair to you, Councillor, yes, that's a tracking that Purchasing Materials and Management does from a point of view of suspended vendors. So it is ongoing.
And are you able to answer if we track city employees to do the training?
So I'm not specifically able to answer that question. I think that's a people and equity question, but Councillor, I would expect that that is probably tracked through Eli, through our training portals.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Are there any further questions from the committee? I think I got everyone anyways. So I'll just look and ask see if is there anyone wishing to speak? Would anyone like to move the item? Councillor Myers. Councillor Malik, you haven't moved anything yet today. Go, all right. Councillor Malik moves the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we are on to AU 1.5, which is Building Better Outcomes, Audit of Toronto's Buildings Inspection Function. And we do have a presentation on this item. So I'll welcome Tara Anderson and Ina Chan to the podium. Please go ahead when you're ready.
So this performance audit of Toronto Building was included on our 2022 work plan and is the first of a multi-phase operational review, with this report focused on the inspection function of Toronto Building. I'm joined by my Deputy Auditor General, Ina Chan, who will also be presenting today. And our audit team members are here, Bruna Corbezzi, Angela Rafalovich, and Celia Tao. I'd like to thank my team for the excellent work they've done on this audit, and also to Toronto Building Division, Will Johnston, Kamal Gagna, and their team for their support and assistance. In this presentation, we'll provide a brief background and our audit objectives, followed by a walkthrough at a high level of some of our key audit findings and recommendations and conclusion. Next slide. It's always important to think about why an audit matters. So it's not always about dollars, processes, and compliance. For this audit, it matters because it's about keeping buildings, and more importantly, the people inside of them, safe. I've included a quote here from the Ontario Building Officials Association about the Ontario Building Code. And as noted, the code provides protection by reducing potential hazards to building occupants, ourselves, and families. By way of background, the Building Act lays out the legislative framework governing the construction, renovation, demolition, and change of use of buildings in Ontario. And the Ontario Building Code sets standards for public health and safety, fire protection, and structural sufficiency. Key objectives of the Building Code include protecting public health and safety and limiting the probability of certain types of damage or degradation as a result of the design or construction of a building. This is why the chief building official and building inspector's roles are important in enforcing the Building Code Act and the Ontario Building Code. And that is also why this audit is important. Next slide, please. So the Building Code sets out each stage of construction requiring an inspection. It is important to note that this is the responsibility of the permit holder to notify the chief building official that the construction is ready to be inspected. After the notice is received, an inspector is required to carry out the inspection within the legislated timeframe specified by the Building Code, typically within 2 working days of being notified. This context is important to note because Toronto Building primarily conducts inspections when a notification or request is received from a permit holder or if the division receives a complaint. And Toronto Building has emphasized to us that under the Building Code Act, the onus is on the permit holder to notify the division when construction is ready to be inspected. This graph shows that there is an upward increasing trend in the overall number of open permits. In 2021, Toronto Building conducted 155,000 inspections on 62,000 building permits, complaints, and orders. At the end of 2021, there were 226,000 open building permits. So this context is important as volumes are high and growing, and there are limited resources. Our audit aimed to answer the following questions. Are there opportunities to strengthen policies and procedures, or policies and processes for inspecting, construction, and issuing orders? are inspections being completed in compliance with the division's operational policies and procedures? And 3, are inspections being conducted in accordance with legislated timeframes for inspections? So through this audit, we identified 3 key areas where there's opportunities for the chief building official to strengthen policies and procedures, reinforce the quality and consistency of inspections, and modernize the information system and ensure that it provides better and reliable data for management and staff. In our report, we noted that many of the issues in this audit are not new. Some were also identified in our previous 2013 audit, and Toronto Building recognizes that it has not yet fully addressed some of our office's previous audit recommendations, due in part to challenges such as limited resources and a need to modernize its system and have improved data. Toronto Building, however, undertook a program review recently and has been working to address the systemic challenges found in their review and their impacts by changing its organizational structure to be more effective. So they're moving from their current geographic-based, district-based operating model to a new functional-based model. They're addressing resourcing issues which impact the progress towards fully addressing previous audit recommendations. And third, they're working towards modernizing technology to support business transformation. On the first key area to strengthen Toronto Building's policies and processes, our findings and recommendations included: 1, implementing a risk-based approach for reviewing and addressing open permits, and in particular, the permits where construction has already started with no recent inspection. 2, communicating and following up on deficiencies, identifying during inspections. 3, issuing and enforcing orders as part of a graduated enforcement approach to ensure violations and other matters are promptly and properly addressed. And 4, improving data to determine compliance with legislated timeframes for inspections. And we'll walk you through each of these points in more detail. In our audit, we looked at open permits where no inspection had been conducted in 2021. And the graph on this slide shows you a breakdown of the open building permits at the end of 2021 by the year the permit was issued. So the red part of the bars shows that over 3/4, so about 178,200 of open permits had not received an inspection in 2021. And you'll also note a large proportion of open permits that have not had a recent inspection. They're the older permits, with over half of them from 2016 or earlier. In our audit, we selected a sample of 25 open new residential home permits. And for 20 of these homes, where at the time of our audit work, there was no recent inspection. And as you can see from this slide, from a review of Google Maps images taken after the last inspection of those properties, it appears that construction continued without the permit holder contacting Toronto Building for prescribed inspections. In fact, some proceeded to the point that construction had been completed and the properties were occupied. At our request, Toronto Building inspectors visited the properties, and they found eight.
How are you? Good. Are you still at home or are you at home? Oh, okay. I don't know, did Rob?
So at our request, Toronto Building inspectors visited the properties and found 8 or 40% of the properties were already occupied. One of these has not yet passed an occupancy inspection, and an order has been issued, but management advised that no unsafe conditions were observed. 7 or 35% were not yet occupied, and 5 or 25% where inspectors could not determine the occupancy status. For the other 5 of the 25 with open permits where inspections were conducted in 2021 but were not passed, at our request, again, Toronto Building inspectors visited these properties and noted that 4 of the 5 were occupied. One of these properties was issued an occupancy permit upon further inspections, and the other 3 occupied properties have not yet passed an occupancy inspection, and 1 new order has been issued. So as we've shown in our sample, what's important to know is that when permit holders do not notify Toronto Building that they're ready for prescribed inspections, and a significant amount of time has passed without any follow-up by Toronto Building staff, potential risks may exist that the builder did not construct the building in accordance with the issued building permit, and that permit holders have moved forward with the next stage of construction, and building elements may be covered before the prescribed inspection has been carried out and passed, and/or construction has been completed and the building is occupied without all the required inspections to confirm that applicable law has been met and health and safety and other objectives of the building code are fulfilled. What this slide shows is that out of the 226,000 open permits at the end of 2021, in red, for more than half of open permits, construction has commenced and there have been no recent inspections. So the 20 houses that I was talking about fall into this bucket. In the orange, for more than a quarter of the open permits, there has been no inspection at all since the permit was issued and the construction status is unknown. As we highlighted at the start of our presentation, and as this graph shows, the volume of potential work is high, and there is a gap to be addressed. However, there are limited resources to address this gap. That is why we recommended that Toronto Building develop a risk-based approach for assessing and addressing these open permits. Identifying key factors that increase or decrease risk and regularly analyzing the risk profile will help to better prioritize the follow-up on open permits and make more efficient use of limited inspection resources. I'll now turn it over to my Deputy Auditor General, Ina Chan, to walk you through the remaining key audit findings and recommendations.
Thank you, Auditor General. The second area where Toronto Building can strengthen its processes is in communicating and following up on deficiencies identified during inspections. Toronto Building has policies which set out expectations for tracking identified deficiencies if an inspection is not passed. Based on the inspection records for permit files we reviewed, we found these expectations were not always being followed. Where inspectors don't document deficiencies using IBMS system functionality, it makes it more difficult to track identified deficiencies through their resolution and to determine what needs following up and reinspection. It also makes it more difficult for management to effectively monitor permit status. Inspectors are given significant leeway in deciding what enforcement action to take when they identify deficiencies, because there's a broad range of deficiencies from minor to major. In the files we reviewed, we frequently observed that when inspectors identified deficiencies, they would attempt to resolve them through verbal warnings and reminders, but orders were not often issued. As a result, some deficiencies took a long time to address. The gray slice in the pie chart on the slide shows that over 60% of open deficiencies, an order has not been issued to bring about compliance. And in the red on the right, the majority of these open deficiencies have been outstanding for more than 1 year. While we recognize that orders are just one of the tools available to inspectors, and there's no requirement in the Act to issue orders, we recommended that Toronto Building provide guidance to its inspection staff with criteria or circumstances where it would be appropriate and expected to issue orders. By issuing orders, Toronto Building reinforces the permit holder's responsibility for compliance. This brings us to the third area where Toronto Building can strengthen processes, and this is that is issuing and enforcing orders to ensure matters are promptly and properly addressed. As shown on this slide, when orders are issued, they do bring about compliance. And you can see that the vast majority of orders issued since 1989 have eventually been closed off. But as you see in the yellow, orange, and red, it can still take some time before the orders are resolved. Based on our observations, enforcing orders continues to be an area which needs attention. Where orders aren't addressed, this can lead to similar risks where construction moves forward and building elements may be covered or construction completed and the building occupied without all the required inspections to confirm that the objectives of the building code are fulfilled. We do note that since our last audit, Toronto Building has made progress on following up on open, unsafe orders, and that the division has started rolling out a new enforcement policy for issued orders in late 2021. Improving data used to determine compliance with legislated timeframes is the fourth area for strengthening Toronto Building processes. Toronto Building reported around 90 to 91% compliance in 2020 and 2021, and our analysis of their IBMS data shows similar results. However, it's not possible for us to fully verify the accuracy of these reported metrics because of limitations in the IBMS data. In particular, the compliance rate may be impacted when inspectors reschedule inspections due to workload constraints. However, based on how data is recorded, it's not possible to determine what proportion was canceled or rescheduled for this reason. In addition, when an inspection is not requested through the online booking portal, inspectors do not always track on-site requests or direct calls as a new inspection request in IBMS, so it's not possible to determine if the inspection was conducted within the 2-day requirement. Therefore, we recommended Toronto Building improve data collected and used to determine this KPI. In Section B of the report, we highlight that Toronto Building should continue to improve and strengthen its procedures and practices to reinforce the quality and consistency of inspections. First, Toronto Building inspection staff can improve record keeping. Good record keeping and retention are important to demonstrate what inspectors have done to fulfill their duties under the Act. Notes and records are important for supporting inspection pass or fail decisions, and they're also important for understanding what occurred if cases or claims raise questions of potential legal liability, which sometimes may arise many years down the road. Toronto Building has documentation standards it expects its inspectors to follow. In the report, we have a figure that shows the range of compliance that these documentation, the range of compliance with these documentation standards. The colors reflect how frequently the inspections on each of the 26 files we reviewed complied with the specific documentation requirements. So for example, on this slide, it shows the top row of the figure in the report and shows the results of whether inspectors were recording identified deficiencies in the deficiency tracking function in IBMS. We found in red 14 files where no inspections met this requirement. There were 9 files in yellow and orange shades with varying levels of compliance, where records for some inspections complied with the documentation requirement and others did not. And in green, 1 file where records for all inspections met this requirement. The top row, this is the overall figure that's in the report, and the top row is the deficiencies that we just walked through. Overall, what we're trying to show in this figure is that the extent of inspectors' notes and records varied from file to file and from inspector to inspector. Tracking deficiencies is one of the areas that needs the most focus, but for other areas, record keeping was better. But good record keeping practices should continue to be reinforced. Toronto Building Management recognized that there is still room for improvement, and further training, supervision, and monitoring of staff can be put in place to reinforce compliance with the policies. The other areas for improvement to reinforce quality and consistency of inspections includes clarifying expectations for using and relying on third-party professional reports. Toronto Building can be more clear about what must be done and documented when inspectors rely on reports from architects and engineers, and in particular following up on limitations, issues, and deficiencies noted in the report. Toronto Building can also strengthen on-site supervision and monitoring. We found on-site supervisory review and monitoring of inspections very limited. We also found that the quality assurance process can be enhanced. Right now, semi-annual inspection audits by managers are desk reviews of inspection records. There's no on-site or observational element. And we found that managers were not identifying or providing feedback on areas that needed greater attention. Toronto Building also had an over 20% vacancy in frontline inspectors at the end of 2021 and continues to need to address challenges in recruiting and retaining inspectors. Toronto Building Management recognizes the need to strengthen these areas and will be addressing them through their program review. And the last section of our report highlights the importance of modern systems and better data. IBMS was implemented in 1999 and has been used for many years to support the building permit inspection process. In our files, we found that IBMS does not support Toronto Building's operational needs. For example, the status of whether an inspection of a construction stage has passed, deficiencies identified, and notes of inspection attempts are accessed in just different parts of the system. and as a consequence, inspection data recorded in different places may contain conflicting information. Throughout the report, we also identified examples of ways IBMS does not support effective and efficient data analysis or integration with business intelligence tools. Better data can help identify systemic issues and improve inspection processes. For example, we identified that enhancements to system functionality and data are needed to effectively collect and analyze data on actions taken to follow up on open orders and to improve the monitoring of the status of open orders. I now turn it back to the Auditor General to conclude and recap.
Thank you, Deputy Auditor General Chan. So in conclusion, we provided 20 recommendations in our audit report, which we feel will help improve Toronto Building's inspection function. And again, this is important as it can impact the safety of buildings and the people inside them. Management has agreed to all 20 recommendations, and their response and action plan are attached to the end of the report. It is important that the Chief Building Official and the Toronto Building Division management and staff work expediently to address the recommendations in our report and in its own program review. It will also be important for the Chief Technology Officer to support them in modernizing and updating their system to provide better and reliable data that will be key in order to address some of our recommendations. I'd like to thank Will Johnston, Kamal Gagna, and their team at Toronto Building Division for all their assistance and support during our audit, and thank you again to my team as well. We'll now take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General and Madam Deputy Auditor General. I'll ask the committee for questions. Councillor Cole, Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, this is very comprehensive. What a overwhelming report and job. It's just mind-boggling because I don't think anybody has any idea how much construction is going on in our city. Have you ever looked at possibly recommending that the city look at having sort of a hybrid model and maybe using what the province does, and that's the TSSA type body to do some of the work? Because you know, we've got a 20% shortage of staff here already, overwhelming number of construction permits and projects. So is it maybe viable for you to recommend or somebody to recommend that we maybe look at that TSSA model used by the province in their inspection of, you know, elevators, et cetera? Has that been a possible option?
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm going to actually redirect that question to management, to Will Johnston.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Currently, you know, looking at the regulations and the way they're set up, there is an opportunity where registered code agencies can come in to support local government in providing those inspection and permitting processes. However, across the province, the uptake for those is really limited. I believe the last time I checked, it was like there was only 2 of those agencies across the province.
And I guess, again, the number of construction projects, I mean, what is happening to the trend line and number of applications for, you know, homes and condos and multi-res buildings? What's happening to the trend line there?
Through the chair, I would say that, you know, looking at the amount of construction activity that we see in the city, it's a very healthy activity. And so for a number of years, we were seeing that activity increasing year over year over the last couple of years through the pandemic. I would say there's a slight reduction in that activity. However, it still is very healthy construction activity in the city.
And then in terms of attracting inspectors, are you losing them to the private sector, or are you just unable to attract young people to enter the force and enter your workforce? What's the issue? Losing or not attracting people?
So through the chair, I would say it's a really good question that you're raising, and based on my analysis, I would say it's both. So there are challenges around attracting new talent into Toronto Building, and there's also, we have a lot of our talent moves to other municipalities. Some of those challenges as far as the movement is often, you know, when you look at the work that's going on in the city of Toronto, the work that our inspectors carry out, it is very complex work. and the demand is fairly high. Combined with that is, in order for inspectors to work in this space, they do need provincial qualifications, which is a fairly onerous and cumbersome process in order to achieve those qualifications. And what we often see is, you know, really good graduates coming out of school will go somewhere else to do that work as opposed to choosing the City of Toronto to do that work. That all said, there's a number of tactics we've been using to attract more talent to us. And so we have started and we've instituted what I'd call an entry-level inspector position so that we can attract talent into Toronto Building, grow that talent ourselves, and we've been quite successful with that. We've also been lobbying the province or advocating through the province for changes to that provincial qualification and registration process because we believe it is becoming a barrier to entry for folks going into that field. And what I can share with you there is the province is consulting on that changes to that program currently. That work is underway right now as a result of that advocating we've done.
Yeah, just one further question on that is that we have a lot of very talented overqualified engineers and construction professionals that are coming to Canada from, you know, every country conceivable. Are there barriers to them getting the qualifications? Is that part of what you referred to as the provincial barrier?
What I'm referring to is actually just the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing provides requirements where there's a number of exams an inspector needs to pass in order to do this work. But going to the point you just raised, which is a really good point, we do have a program where we work through George Brown College, and these are internationally trained professionals that we hire after they go through a program at George Brown, and we run them through a program at the City of Toronto so that they can hopefully be better prepared and go into some of the positions we offer here at the City of Toronto.
Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunziata.
Just a couple of questions. As far as resources, I mean, my concern is building permits for homes, like Committee of Adjustment, new homes. So as far as resources, have we thought of maybe increasing the building permit fees to offset the inspections?
Through the chair, that is something we have looked at it, but as far as, you know, I would say as far as, you know, bringing in new inspectors, probably from a revenue perspective, that's not the issue. One of the things that's really important is we have to balance what the fee is for a building permit with the fact that if the fee goes too high, what can happen is we can drive that work underground, and then, you know, people, you know, property owners may carry out the work without a permit because the fee could become a barrier. I think where the fee is set today, it is appropriate for what's going on right now. I think the challenge is about, you know, continuing to do work in order to attract more talent into the division to carry out the work.
Okay. Well, my second question is, when we give a building permit out to an individual that's building a new home or additions or whatever, so what is the time? I mean, there's no expiry date on that building permit. I'll give you an example. There's one in my ward. They've had the building permit for 7 years, and they haven't completed the work. And a number of complaints have come in to me, and we're told by the building department, as long as they even work for an hour on this home, that they can continue having a valid building permit. But in the meantime, there's all these complaints and things happening on that, and I'm getting a lot of that. So why can't we change? I mean, I don't think somebody should have a building permit for 6-7 years and do nothing and disrupt the community, which some of them have, without being fined or something. Yeah.
Through the chair, that's a very good question, and it's also one that does come up a lot. Yeah. Where this comes from is the Provincial Building Code Act that we you know, that administers the way we carry out the work. It allows the property owner to have 6 months before they start the work, and then they can stall or basically slow down that work or have periods where no work is going on, provided that it's not more than 1 year. So as long as within a year, the property owner is doing work to move the project forward, we have no authority to rescind or revoke that permit.
Well,
And that's coming from the provincial
Yeah,
requirement.
but I've got one in my ward that's 6 years.
Yeah, and we do see that from time to time, and one of the tactics that we use with those property owners is trying to support them so at least they get the work done on the outside, and then we can allow them additional time to do the work on the interior so that it's having less of a impact on the community. That all said, I think the challenge we have is that the provincial legislation doesn't allow us the authority to revoke those permits, as long as they're doing, not stopping work for more than a year.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Myers, did you have questions?
Through the chair, just a quick question. On page 23 of the report, it says, using IBMS data, we identified 168 closed permits with 227 deficiencies still open. In the event that there's any negligence or liability, where does that liability fall? On the builder or on the city for not issuing the permit?
The chair, I believe that's a question for legal.
Is legal here?
I think online, I think.
I am.
They're online.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. It's Naomi Brown from Legal, and I advise Toronto Building. I just wanted, not sure I'm following the question. I'm just wondering if you could perhaps repeat the question.
Sure. So if we've closed a permit with deficiencies still open, and in the event that there is a problem with the home or someone is injured, is the city open to any liability because of that?
Well, each case will depend on its individual facts, so hard to make a general statement. The city does get sued a lot for cases like that. Whether we assess that there's liability or not will depend on the individual circumstances, right? Like the city is mandated to inspect once called at specific stages of construction, right? So not everything falls within those mandatory stages, and we'll take positions that that's not something that the city could have seen or addressed. It just depends on the circumstances, but I guess in answer to your question, there is potential exposure for missing certain things that are part of the mandated inspections that we carried out.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so we are potentially liable for closing permit with deficiencies that are still open.
Well, through the chair, there is potential liability, again, depending on the circumstances, what that deficiency is, and whether it was something that the city, like the way it works is, yes, the way negligence law works is there's a duty of care, which the city is typically found to owe to owners and previous owners and to a person who attends. And then there's what is the standard of care. So the standard of care, typically the analysis is what would a reasonable inspector have done in the circumstances. And when doing that analysis, they look at what all the tools were that were available in the Building Code Act, what the inspector did, should the inspector have reasonably identified that deficiency, and if a court should find that the inspector reasonably ought to have identified that deficiency and missed it, there is potential exposure to the municipality in an instance.
Thank you. And do you know if this is a ongoing, do we get claims on this very issue currently?
Through the chair, we get a lot of claims like that.
Thank you.
But in fairness, that doesn't mean that we believe that there's liability in every one of those instances, but there are a lot of claims like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Any other questions? I think we've gone around, so I'm going to ask a couple. To the chief building official, part of the report talks about inconsistencies among your staff on how they exercise their duties. there's some stories in there or some descriptions in there. I guess what it speaks to is a combination of training, a review of the policies, getting people to adhere to them. Can you tell the committee what your plan is in the very short term to do that type of work? Because I understand technology and other changes might take time, but there seems to be things you can do right away. Maybe you've started them. Can you tell us what has happened in the very short term?
So through to you, Mr. Chair, there's a number of actions that we have underway in order to address that. A lot of it does relate to training and coaching and mentoring staff. So when we bring on new inspectors, we have an onboarding program that they go through, so that helps there. But some of the things we will be doing as a result of this audit is, integrating a lot of the audit recommendations that the Auditor General has identified into our new operating model that we're implementing right now. And some of that is around, enhancing our training and coaching and mentoring to inspectors. But on top of that, one of the things I think will help a lot is that we are introducing a supervisory level into the inspection team so that we can reduce the amount of span of control between the teams of inspectors and those supervisors so that we can create opportunities for training in the field where they're doing the work. And on top of that, having much more stronger management oversight of the work the inspectors are doing and monitoring that more closely in advance of a lot of these longer term solutions that are mentioned.
And that's going on now? You've already started that type of, okay.
So we're in the process of implementing that operating model right now.
Okay. My second question, and feel free if it's beyond your scope and maybe for the auditor, but it's kind of simple. The report talks about this idea that the onus is on the builder to call you in to come and do the inspections at the various stages. And if they don't call you, you don't know, and life goes on and building goes on and people move into places and it's sitting there open. What advice do you have to homeowners or tenants or occupants or people that maybe just bought a property or are thinking of buying a property in terms of consumer protection to allow them the opportunity to figure out that there is an issue or something that is not being resolved? Because it seems that, it might be only a small circle of people that would only know that these things have not happened. And, is there something simple that people could do or turn to that would resolve some of these things on their own, just because the owners would find out?
I can start with the question, Madam Auditor General.
I can start and turn it over to you.
Okay, go ahead.
I just, through the chair, so some of our recommendations involve modernizing the information system. So part of that could be having a self-serve as part of that so that the permit holder and builder, they can actually go to the system and see the status and details and be aware of needing to notify Toronto Building Division. So just turn it over to Will to complete that thought.
Thank you. Just to add to that is that, my strong recommendation, anyone buying or purchasing a home, it's, we offer a service around property information where, a potential buyer can actually contact us and actually get information on any outstanding orders or what the status of any permits are on that property. On top of that, we do have a permit search function on our website where a property owner or anyone can punch in the address of a property and they can see what all the permits are that have been issued, what the status of those permits are, and on top of that, any orders that have been issued on the property and get the status of that. And I'd strongly recommend that people use those services that we have.
Thank you. I had no further questions. I'll turn to the committee, just to ask if there are members of the committee wishing to speak on this item. Okay, Councillor Annunziata moves the item. However, I had a very quick amendment. Councillor Myers, did you wish to speak on the item? No? Okay. Councillor Cole? No. All right, I'll ask the clerk to display that, rather straightforward. And it's just to ask the Chief Building Official and Chief Information Officer to look for opportunities to offer additional open data relating to Toronto Building and request that they plan to include access to open data in the future technology initiatives, and a lot of those are spoken to in the report. And quite simply, that just connects with my last question, which was just about consumer protection and the ability for people to find out as much as they can about the buildings that they're either directly involved in or live near or involved near. And it's true, there is quite a bit out there on the website, and I commend this city government for putting that information out there. And I just think we should continue to look for those opportunities. Because as the report talks about, there is some onus on people that are doing the work to trigger these type of requests. And if they don't take the step to do that, it's really hard for the building department to figure out what's going on, inside a building where the work's been carrying on for quite a long time. So giving people as much chances as they can to do their own diligence about what they're interested in, I think makes for a better and a stronger system. So I hope you support that. And with that, I will ask all those in favor of the amendment. Any opposed? That is carried. And on the item, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much. We are getting close to the end of the allotted time, and I was just going to propose that we dispose of a couple of items, which I think will be really quick, which is 1.7 is the next item, and 1.9, and I'll let members know that we've got 1.8 with a brief presentation from the controller, and 1.11, in which there will also be a brief presentation. So we're getting close to the wire. AU 1.7 is getting to the root of the issues, February 2023 performance update of urban forestry contractors and city crews. I will ask, are there any members of the committee with questions on that item? Seeing none, I will ask if any members of the committee wish to speak. Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, could you show the amendment that I had? So I'll paraphrase this for the committee, but this simply suggests that the General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Recreation can discontinue reporting to all of the regular meetings about this particular item, which stems back from a previous Audit Committee meeting. And just to remind committee members that this committee was really, really interested in the work of the Auditor General, so much so that we asked for reporting at every meeting. And I think we have reached a period of stability, and there is a balance between taking up the resources of the staff and knowing that you're receiving stable information. So that's my suggestion, if the committee agrees with it, that we release them of that responsibility, but they still have the responsibility to follow up with the Auditor General's follow-up process. So it's not forgotten, it's not off the hook, it's just the frequency of the reports. So with that, I will call for all of those in favor of the amendment. Any opposed? That item is carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. I'm going to skip very momentarily to AU 1.9, which is the Arenas 2021 audited financial statements and status of outstanding 2021 and prior audited financial statements. I'll ask if any members of the committee have any questions on that item. Councillor Myers, go ahead. Yeah, just go ahead and ask it. I'm assuming we'll be fairly quick on this item.
Yeah. So some of the issues that were observed mostly had to do with governance by the boards of these various arenas. Can you just describe what kind of governance training board members receive for the arenas?
So through the chair, I think this may be partly a question for Karen Jones, who I believe is online, but I think that is actually an area of improvement that could happen, is some education on controls and roles and responsibilities, and that's something that internal audit may be able to do going forward.
Good afternoon, through the chair. With the permission of the chair, just to add to the Auditor General's statement, I would just like to say that the arena boards are charged the responsibility. I'm getting significant feedback, and I'm not sure why. I'm sorry.
You sound great, Karen.
Okay, thank you. The arena boards are responsible to City Council directly for ensuring that their audited financial statements are in good order and audited in a timely manner and reported to the city. And I am pleased to see that 6 of the 8 arenas are in fact reporting to Audit Committee in this cycle. There are 2 outstanding audits, and on behalf of the City Manager and Finance, we are, and the Auditor General, we are monitoring progress towards completing those as well. I would just like to mention something that I reported to Audit Committee on last year, which is to point out that we have gone through an unprecedented period of time with the arenas, given that they were like literally physically closed by order of the province under legislation during the COVID-19 emergency. And that has exacerbated what has been somewhat of a trend in backlog from on the part of the arenas. In terms of governance and training of the arena boards, yes, to the Audit Committee, the City Manager's Office does undertake orientation sessions with all our city-owned agencies and corporations each term of council, and when there is a significant turnover of the individual boards, we would go in and do refreshers and briefings as required. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to confirm, is it mandatory that all board members of the arenas take this training?
It is offered and it is conducted by issuing invitation to all board members, and we offer different sessions to accommodate their availability to the extent we can. I would not say that it's legislated that they attend the orientation session, but I must add that they do comply in terms of attendance to these orientation sessions. The take-up has been very positive.
Great. So just to clarify, it's optional, but most of them do the training.
Most of them do the training.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Maris.
Any other questions? Seeing none, any members wishing to speak on the item? Seeing none, I do have a motion. If I can ask the clerk to display that. It's rather short, but it's the Audit Committee requests the City Manager, working with the Auditor General and the Accounting Services Division, to provide an update on the status of the Arena Board's outstanding audits and a report on resolution of the management letters, recommendations, and the upcoming staff report on the Arena Boards. I'll just remind the committee that one of the last times we talked about the audits filed by the Arena Boards, we had requested some additional reporting on the overall situation. And so I would just like to point out that there are a number of management letters with very helpful recommendations in this audit package, and there isn't a complete filing from all of the Arena Boards. I believe that's something that this committee is and will continue to keep an eye on because that is part of our oversight function. And I'm just going to ask for an update when the report comes back on the situation which continues to develop. So I hope you'll support that amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. Members, I'm going to check with you very quickly. We've got 10 minutes before the scheduled lunch break. I understand there's a presentation that should take 5 minutes. The controller's letting me know. We might have a couple of questions. And after that, there's an additional presentation that I understand is also very, very short. I would propose that we just move to finish the agenda. I think we can do that close to 12:30, if not a few minutes after, if everyone's okay with that. Otherwise, we've got to come back after the lunch break. So if I've got a nod, I think we do. I think I'm going to propose that I do that. We'll do the motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. All right, over to you, Mr. Flynn. You have a presentation on AU 1.8, which is the update on the controller on action plans and implementation of recommendations arising from the KPMG audit for the year 2020. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Councillor, Mr. Chair and Councillors. It's my pleasure this afternoon to provide you with an update on the action plans that City staff have undertaken on audit recommendations from our external auditors, KPMG. I'm going to walk through this presentation at a very high level, but would be pleased to answer any questions on more detailed information included in this presentation. So first, I'd like to give a little bit of background for this presentation. This is actually our first opportunity to provide a report back from direction from the July 2022 Council, which directed management to report back on the progress of action plans to address the observation and recommendations included in audit letters provided by KPMG. KPMG began their engagement as the city's external auditor for the December 2020 year end after a predecessor firm had performed audits for the preceding 10 years. As part of that audit, the Chief Financial Officer requested that KPMG provide a more comprehensive audit management letter than had been provided in the past, given their fresh perspective that any new audit firm would bring to their engagement. KPMG has fulfilled that request by providing a comprehensive letter with 55 recommendations, followed up by providing a further recommendations in their 2021 audit, which were just adopted by the committee earlier today. Management welcomes these comments as it helps to validate our own observations and plans for improving processes and systems as we go forward. It is important to note, though, that none of these recommendations has been deemed by KPMG to be significant as to their audit opinion. And city staff are in the process of implementing action plans on all 60 of these recommendations, and the remainder of this presentation talks about the status of those recommendations. Before I comment on individual action plans, though, it is important to note that the state of the city's financial processes and systems as needing improvement and updating was identified prior to the KPMG appointment. As a result of the need to improve and update our processes and systems, and at the direction of the Chief Financial Officer, city staff have commenced a project in 2019 known as the Financial Systems Transformation Project, or FSTP. Just from a perspective of reference, the city's financial systems and processes had not undergone any significant transformation since the system was implemented in 1998 as part of the amalgamation of the city. In fact, the implementation then was just an extension of the Etobicoke system over the whole city without a thorough evaluation of the city's needs or a consideration of all of the related processes. In contrast, FSTP will create a modern, up-to-date financial framework, processes, and systems, integrating information from over 70 subsidiary systems. A project of this size and scale will obviously have significant impact on all of the city's financial processes. So if we could move on. So this slide just provides a very high-level overview of the Financial Systems Transformation Project. We are at the end of the design phase and about to begin the build phase. What the design phase has demonstrated for us is that it was a very collaborative process, that there are a lot of sub-processes that need to be addressed. And the detail level of outputs from the design phase has provided the city with an excellent roadmap for the project to follow that will lead to financial frameworks, processes, and systems that are efficient and effective for the city for many years into the future. So FSTP is going to address approximately half of KPMG's recommendations, but in the meantime, we will be doing some interim steps, and I'm just going to very briefly walk through here the categories or the general themes of the 60 recommendations that management is working on. 34 of them are about improving our financial policies and procedures. 16 of them improve role, responsibility, and clarity. Seven of them are opportunities for us to streamline or centralize. And lastly, although there aren't very many recommendations related to financial acumen, they are important for the city staff to be focused on improving the overall financial acumen of the city staff. Otherwise, all of the hard work that we will do will fall on deaf ears if people don't understand how to do it. The next number of slides, in the interest of time, they're just the list of all of the action plans and that are completed and or underway. I propose to just move forward to the end. Next one, to our next steps. So obviously, from our perspective, our next steps from a management perspective are to continue to monitor the progress that we're making on all of our action plans and obviously report back. We will escalate if there are any concerns in implementing action plans. I think it's important to note that the senior leadership team is fully supportive and making it clear to the organization that these recommendations will be implemented. We'll continue to engage with internal audit to validate that we have completed our action plans, and then of course reporting our progress to the committee. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
5 minutes?
Very good. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will take it into committee and ask if there's anyone that wishes to speak. Seeing none, I do have a very brief motion, which I'll ask the clerk to display. If not, I will paraphrase it very. Oh, there we go. Great, thank you. I'm just going to suggest that we ask the controller to provide an update on implementing each of the items in the management letter recommendations, including any of the interim measures or controls. And I'll just explain it this way. I will thank the controller for his presentation. This is a very important process. It runs parallel to all of the work that the Auditor General is doing. We have the city's outside auditors that we're going to hear from in a moment that have also identified some issues that they think that the city should consider in their management letter. And there's a number of them. There are 60, and those are in various stages as has been just described to us. But it's another thing that the Audit Committee needs to keep an eye on. So my suggestion is requesting a little bit more detail so that we can observe them as they go through the process, much in the same way that we observe the recommendations that the Auditor General has brought forward. All very important work, and all that I am very appreciative of all the people that are working to make things better in the city. So I hope you'll support that. It's just simply a request for a little bit of elaborated reporting, and I will wish the staff good luck on their journey as they go through all of these pieces, because it is important work. So on the amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Okay, thank you. We are on the last item, which is AU 1.11, which is the KPMG Audit Planning Report for the year ended December 31st, 2022. I will welcome to the podium Kevin Travers and Maria Kushnud, both from KPMG.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the time this afternoon to present our audit plan for the City of Toronto for the year ended December 31st, 22. My name is Kevin Travers. I'm the lead audit engagement partner from KPMG for this audit. Joined today by Maria Kushnud, my colleague, also a partner. We'll speak very briefly to this report. This is the first of two formal communications that we have with this group relative to the audit itself. The second will be our findings report. We'll report back to this committee at the conclusion of the audits, along with the same meeting in which you'll review the draft financial statements for the city itself. This report contains a number of important matters as well as required communications with this group. of which I will pass it over to Maria just to highlight a couple of particular items for your interest.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So if we could move on to page 8, Stuart. So page 8 and 9 cover materiality, which is a very important part of our audit scoping. We base materiality using benchmarks that are prescribed by the Canadian auditing standards. On page 9, we've noted that materiality has been calculated based on total revenues for the audit of the year ended December 31st, 2022. In terms of the audit misstatement posting threshold, that number is calculated at 5% of total materiality, and that's 15 million. That's not to say that we don't report any items that are below that threshold. If they're of unusual or fraudulent nature, we still do bring that forward to the Audit Committee. With that, I'll move on to page 10, where we highlight some of the involvement of management specialists that management uses to come up with the financial information that is reported in the financial statements. To respond to that, KPMG does engage our own valuation teams for these two particular items, and they support the financial audit team. On page 11 and 12, we're covering our group scoping, and that's to say that the City of Toronto audit is a consolidated audit. So City of Toronto financial statements includes some of the other agencies and corporations, or all of the agencies and corporations, as well as Toronto Hydro, which is a government business enterprise. And what we've done here on page 12 is we've provided you with highlights of which components are considered significant. So that would include City of Toronto non-consolidated, as well as Toronto Hydro Corporation and TTC. And we've outlined here the level of procedures that we perform. We also issue opinions on standalone audits for these components, and that are issued separately. On page 13 to 15, we've covered some of the presumed fraud risks that are included in all of our audits. So these are risks that are not specific to City of Toronto, but they're required by the Canadian auditing standards to be completed for all of our audit engagements. In addition to that, we have included consolidation as one of the risks or areas of focus where we do complete additional level of work. With that, I'll take you to page 16. So page 16 to 21 highlights some of our other areas of focus based on the financial statement captions. We've highlighted here the nature of substantive procedures. These procedures are not meant to be a comprehensive list, but rather it's provided here to provide you with an overview of the type of procedures we perform. And these procedures are updated annually based on our understanding of the changes in the operations at the City of Toronto. With that, we can move on to page 22. That is our key milestones and deliverables slide. So on this slide, we've provided you with the timelines of when we start our audit planning, completion, as well as reporting. These have been discussed with management in terms of other timelines that the city has to report on, including Audit Committee timelines. With that, we move on into the appendices, and we're not planning on covering the appendices in detail. There is some really important and useful information about new accounting and auditing standards included in the appendices. We welcome you to take a look at those, but at this point, this culminates the formal part of our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I will turn to the committee. Are there any questions of the presenters? Any questions at all? Okay, seeing none. I'll take this into committee. Anyone wishing to speak on the item? No? May I have someone move to receive the report? Councillor Myers moves to receive the report. And with that, I'll just say thank you for the presentation very much so. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. All right, well, that is the last item of business, and therefore, that would bring this committee to a conclusion today. I'll say thank you very, very much to Madam Auditor General and her team, our visitors from KPMG, to all of the staff, to the clerk staff, and most importantly, to the technical staff who have really rose to some challenges today in the meeting. So very much appreciated. I bid everyone a great day. Thank you.